Hello. 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 Welcome to the Cloud English Podcast. My name is Luke. It is October 25th, 1:39 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 1987, I think? I'd have to check. Well, today we're going to be talking about the news. Not just going over news stories. A little bit more than that. Talking about specifically English phrases for talking about the news. It's going to be a slightly shorter episode than usual because I started a little bit later than I wanted to, and it is what it is. But we'll get through as much as we can, as quickly as we can. We're going to be moving pretty fast today, so prepare yourselves for that. Again, we're going to start with useful phrases, expressions for talking about news stories that you heard. And then we will be talking about words and phrases from a specific episode of a news story. I shouldn't have said episode, should I? No, we're going to be, let me restart. We're going to be talking about words and phrases from a news story. Yes, now I've got it out. And then we'll be looking at some phrasal verbs, useful phrasal verbs for talking about politics. So a lot of idioms and phrases and expressions today. You won't want to miss it. Of course, if there are any juicy comments or questions, rather, about what we're talking about today, then I'll be happy to answer those. If you haven't already done so, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. That supports me. It supports the podcast. I would really, really appreciate it. It's not a big deal. It's a tiny thing, but it's a huge help for me. So make sure to do that. Basically, it says to the algorithms, hey, other people should watch this. Other people should be here, right? If you're watching this later or listening to it, perhaps you can join every Friday on YouTube and Facebook at around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which I think is 6 p.m. GMT, if I'm not mistaken. And then if you're watching and you'd like to listen, you can catch the full episodes as audio on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, Amazon, what have you. If you'd like, you can get a free course in the links in the description. And you can also get 30% off the yearly membership, which gives you access to all of the courses on my website for 30% off, paid monthly with the yearly price. So there's a yearly price you can pay, but then you're paying a large chunk, right? And then accessing the courses for 1 year. Well, you can do the same thing monthly, paying only monthly for the first 12 months. And you can cancel anytime, of course. So that's a pretty good deal, in my opinion. All right, let's get straight into it. As I've said, we have a little bit less time than usual. So let's immediately jump into it. We're going to be starting with expressions we can use when we want to talk to other people about current events, about things happening in the news, right? How can we actually do that? And I've actually come up with what I think is a fairly clever little way to use ChatGPT as slides. So I've already got all of the content, and all I have to do is paste the word next or type the number of the slide that I want to see, and it'll give all of the information. And it's more flexible. I think it's pretty cool. I'm starting to think about how maybe traditional slides are just not the answer. I don't know. Anyway, so when you want to engage with other people about something that's happening in the news for whatever reason, the first thing that you need to do is ask them if they know about it already. If they already know, then you don't have to explain everything. And if they already know and you don't ask the question, then you may explain everything and then they'll say, yeah, I already know. So the first thing to do is figure out if they know. And the best way to do that is to say, did you hear about? Did you hear about the that happened yesterday at the You want to give a few pieces of information, not everything, just enough to identify what you're talking about, right? Did you hear about the guy who got maybe rescued from recently read, a guy who got rescued from the wilderness after a very long period of time, lost somewhere in, I don't know, Canada or something. Did you hear about that? No, I didn't hear about it. Now I want to maybe say a few more things about it or have a discussion, right? Now, sometimes I do want to just start. There's this story about, and then I'll say a few things. Then I may say, did you hear about it? And if you say yes, then we can begin talking about it. If you say no, then I can give some more information. This is also a way to introduce a news story. There's this story about, so often we call one piece of news a story. I read a story yesterday, and maybe you'll say where you got the story from. I read a story yesterday in the Associated Press. I read a story yesterday maybe in the Wall Street Journal. I saw a story yesterday on, and then that would be the news that you watch on TV, perhaps, right? I read or I saw that. This is where we don't want to use story. We'll say something like, I read or I saw that a man had been lost in the wilderness and was rescued after almost 5 days, and he was starving, and I actually can't remember because it was so long ago. But I read that. I saw that. Saw that would be for a TV, maybe news broadcast, and I suppose you could use that for a newspaper too, and I read that would be an article online or a newspaper or something like that, okay? So did you hear about the new AI assistant that can summarize books? People are saying it's a game changer for students. As an example, right? There's this story about a rare piece of art that was found in someone's attic. It could be worth millions. Okay, so just some ways to begin that conversation, right? Now, what about when we want to begin talking about it? We want to say what we think, right? We want to give a viewpoint. We want to understand other people's opinions. We want to begin the discussion. Of course, you can say, I think, in my opinion, right? Those are the basics. You can use that in any situation where you want to share your opinion. However, from what I've seen, and I'm not sure I agree with, are slightly different ways to bring up a viewpoint, right? Now, you might use the second one when you disagree with someone else, or you might use it when you're talking about a thing that happened that you don't agree with. From what I've seen, okay, they're planning to and then I would say my view on that, right? Or you can directly state an opinion using from what I've seen. From what I've seen, they're doing a terrible job of, so you're adding what we would call a judgment call inside of a description of the thing that happened. From what I've seen, they're doing a terrible job maybe planning the budget for next year. So I know that they're planning the budget for next year, and I'm adding a value judgment about that as I describe it or as I explain it. I'm not sure I agree with what they're doing this year. Okay, so that's again to make a comment on something that's happening. Or they're doing a great job with this year, again, making a comment about the thing that's going on as I'm explaining it, right? I'm not sure I agree with is an interesting way to make it a bit softer, right? If you say I strongly disagree with, well, that's stronger than saying I'm not sure I agree with, which is, let's say, less direct and a little bit more what's the right word? Diplomatic. I think that AI like this could really change the way people learn. From what I've seen, hidden art treasures often come with complicated legal battles, responding to the other points, and using feel or it seems to me may make it softer as well. So I'm not sure. It seems to me, I feel, especially it seems to me, and I'm not sure, makes it a little gentler than just saying, it is this way. I strongly agree, right? I'm sure that, things like that, okay? So let's keep going here. Now, we've brought up opinions. Now, another person might say their opinion. Now we have a back and forth. Probably the reason you brought up the news story is that you wanted to engage with someone. You wanted to have a back and forth with them. Now, if they say something that you feel strongly about and you agree with, we add words like totally to make it stronger, right? You can say, yeah, I agree with you. But just saying, I agree with you is not neutral, but not really strong, unless you say it like this. Oh, I agree with you. But if you say, I agree with you, I agree with you, you're agreeing, but it's almost a way to move the conversation forward a little bit, right? But if I say, I totally agree with you, I absolutely agree with you, I completely agree with you, I 100% agree with you, right? These add emphasis to your agreement in the conversation about the news story. And when you do that, you're showing the other person that maybe they can keep talking or keep explaining, right? You want to let them know that you're on the same page. Now, when we get into specific details, it can be useful to make little comments kind of as we move through the story. That's a great point. You could do that when you're agreeing or disagreeing. If you want to agree with a little piece and then make a broader disagreement, you can still use, that's a great point, right? So we disagree about AI or something that's going on in AI or about this art piece that's been discovered, but perhaps you make a good point that maybe there's a lot of legal stuff when it comes to these art pieces about who gets it and what it's worth and all of that. So that's a good point. But, right, so you could still disagree there. However, if you're in a conversation and you want to just let the other person know you're listening and you're paying full attention, you could say that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, and then they might keep talking. Or you could use that's a great point as a transition to then say your own opinion. That's a great point. And I would say, or I think, in my view, right, in my opinion, from what I've seen, right, then you can say what you think. You're absolutely right about that is probably less about the little points along the way and more about someone else's conclusion about the situation, right? You've explained your viewpoint on this issue, and I've heard everything. And after all of that, I might just say, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Now, sometimes we say you're absolutely right when we are wrong, and we want to acknowledge that we are wrong. So we disagreed on something, and I want to let you know that you've now persuaded me that what I originally thought was incorrect, and now I agree with you. You know what? And there we might add, I would probably add, you know what? You're absolutely right. I don't know what I was thinking, something like that. Anytime you're in a disagreement, you're absolutely right. Adds a lot of emphasis to saying, you are correct about that. Now, how do we disagree? Well, as I said, we can use what was it? That's a great point. That's a good point. And then disagree. That's an interesting way to do it. But other ways to disagree would be, I see where you're coming from, but this is similar to saying, that's a good point. It is. It's similar to saying, good point. Except it's not quite as much of an endorsement of your opinion as good point. Good point is like saying, hey, you made a point that is true and I can't deny it. I see where you're coming from is a little less. It's sort of like I understand why you would have this opinion. I understand the perspective. I understand the point of view that would make you think this, but I don't think it's a good point. I still think you're wrong, right? But I do see where you're coming from. In other words, if I were standing in your shoes, I would think the same thing that you think, but I actually know the truth, right? So it's actually a good way to, when you're in a debate, show the other person that you understand them without agreeing with them. It's not rude or anything like that. I see where you're coming from, but. Now, that's a great point. That's a good point. Again, you're giving them some credit for something. But if I say instead interesting, that doesn't mean that it's a good point. I still think you're totally wrong. If I say that's an interesting point, that's an interesting perspective there, right? Well, then what is interesting? Interesting, a lot of things are interesting. Some of the dumbest things you can imagine are interesting, right? So it might be a way to downplay how much you disagree with someone. It's not a good point. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. It almost could be sometimes seen as talking down to someone, right? Oh, very interesting. You're listening, and now you have something to say. Although, I think you're totally wrong. Right. It's saying something without really showing support, and it's not rude, although the use of the word interesting there allows you to say something positive without saying that they're right in any way, right, or giving them any credit at all. I'm not so sure about that. In my view, this is more direct disagreement, right? To more directly disagree with someone, basically, I don't think that's right. Now, if you say, I don't think that's right, I think you're wrong, that's crazy, what are you talking about? Those are fine. I think those are all okay to use, but you just want to be aware that those can be a bit direct. They might seem a bit direct when people hear them. They might sometimes think that you're being too direct when really we're just having a conversation about the news, right? If I say, no, that's wrong. Hey, listen, we're just talking about this art piece that was found. You're overreacting a little. Now, if I say, I'm not so sure about that, it's saying, I don't think so, I don't agree, but it's doing it, I think, in a natural way, in a way that doesn't sound too confrontational, and I think in a way that sounds respectful. So I'm not so sure about that. Simple disagreement, sounds respectful, not too direct. I like it. I use it pretty often. Okay, so I think AI should be regulated more strictly to avoid issues. I see where you're coming from, but it's important to encourage innovation. Okay? Now, finally, we have mentioned a news story. We've brought it up. We've told another person about it. We've said what we think. We've gone back and forth. We've agreed. We've disagreed. Where does the conversation go? Well, we can ask questions. We can say things to keep it going. Hopefully you have conversations to connect with other people. Hopefully, news stories act as a way to get to know other people better, to work out ideas, to see what they think, to share what you think, right? The great thing about news is that it's fresh content that comes out every day that can be used to engage with other people. It's a lot easier to say, hey, did you hear about the thing they found in the attic? It's a natural thing to talk about rather than saying, hey, you know what? I just finished reading a 600-year-old book. That's the great thing about the news. It's fresh and people may be interested in it. Whereas if I say, hey, I just finished reading a 600-year-old book. Do you want to hear my summary? They'll probably say, no, thank you. Bye-bye. right? They don't want to hear about it. So I think that's what's cool about news, but if people get wrapped up in political and they get stuck on their ideology, this is the downside of it. The thing that I think is so not strange, I understand it, but I see where people are coming from. But it's sad to me that a news story makes people suddenly sometimes upset because they realize other people may not agree. And when they encounter someone who doesn't, it's an upsetting experience. Whereas I would say a news story is this thing that has arisen out of the milieu of the culture, and now we can engage with it and have a conversation. What a beautiful thing, right? Do we have to get angry when someone doesn't have the same political view as us? I don't see why we would. I mean, I do, but I don't. So we might ask some questions to keep the conversation going. What do you think about, someone makes a point and I want to ask the follow-up question. Well, what do you think about how they handled this? Or I make a point and I'm explaining something and I say, well, what do you think about how they did that, right? Have you read anything else about this or that? This could be a dangerous question if they haven't and they just say no. But sometimes it's a way to get another person to say, well, I heard this or I heard that, right? Hear, read, the same thing when it comes to news. It doesn't have to be read. It could be heard. Heard is more general, more broad, because heard could be both read and listened and watched, anything basically, whereas read is usually just specifically about articles in the news. But it's generally all okay and a good way to get people to say a little bit more about what's happening, right? How do you feel about the impact this will have on something? Probably for the AI one, not for the artwork that was discovered, right? Although maybe the artwork could have an impact on, I guess it could have an impact on something. How do you feel about the impact this will have on, a lot of people are talking about AI, on people's careers, on this industry, on that industry? I love questions that start with, how do you feel about, or what do you think about? These two are great discussion questions because they get the wheels turning. They make people think and give an opinion and explain that opinion. The reason that this one is, let's say, maybe not as good as a discussion question is that it's what's called a closed question. There are open questions and closed questions. Open questions get people to share opinions and explain things. What do you think about? How do you feel about? Maybe what's the best way to, right? How should we? A lot of how questions and what questions and sometimes closed questions can be used in the same way. Get people to share what's going on in their heads. And a yes-no closed question, did you do this? Have you read this? Have you seen this? Can make a continuous conversation challenging if it's only that type of question, right? If it's only that type. Now, as you're going in the conversation, you may use little expressions, little phrases. Really? I didn't know that. That's interesting. Little comments and things to show the other person that you're listening, to show that you're kind of paying attention. That can be a great thing. Wow. Oh, yeah? Wow, that's surprising. Who knew? All of that sort of thing. Those little comments, they're what are called active listening cues. They tell the other person that, I'm listening to what you're saying. Wow, sure. Oh my God. What? I can't believe it. Hey, are you just rattling off all of the active listening cues you know? Are you actually listening to me? Interesting. But they can, in a normal human conversation, they can be a very useful way to make it a more human kind of conversation than just staring at them while they talk, right? And nodding and gestures and things like that also help. So that's it. Some ways to talk with people about things happening in the news. Remember, we start by asking someone if they've heard something. or perhaps explaining a little bit about what happened and then asking, did you hear about it? Did you read about it? Did you see, right? Then we can state an opinion, or we can immediately start a back and forth where we agree, we disagree, but we probably want to do it in a way that's less direct and comes across as more respectful. And we can disagree in a respectful way, right? That's an interesting point, although, and then finally, when we want to keep the conversation going or extend it, we can use active listening cues, and we can ask interesting questions, especially open questions, to get the other person to talk. So that's it. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe and get a free course in the links in the description. All right. All right. Great. Great. So let's, what else do we have? As I said, I want to kind of keep things moving. The time, I'm a little short on time today, so I want to move right along. And then we will, then we'll call it a day, I suppose. We'll call it a day. So what I want to do is watch a news story. We often watch movies and TV shows, clips from those, and we learn language from those. I want to watch a recent news story about British politics, changes happening in the cabinet of a prime minister, and we're going to try to pick out some interesting expressions from it. So let's hop over to here, and we're going to go through this, and we're going to learn some English. Shall we? We shall.
An intense battle at the top of government has ended. One victorious, one vanquished.
That's a beautiful transition. An intense battle at the top of government. Okay, so any political battle is probably going to have something to do with either voting or important decisions or internal politics, right? Hiring, firing, that sort of thing.
An intense battle at the top of government has ended. One victorious, one vanquished.
Okay, vanquished is a formal way to say defeated. We typically would not want to use the word vanquished unless it's some sort of big epic battle, right? It's not a word that's used in ordinary everyday communication, right? It's quite formal. The feeling that you get maybe is slaying a dragon in a fairy tale, right? The foe was vanquished. It's got that tone to it, and so the stakes are high. This is government. This is the top of government. This is big positions in the cabinet of the prime minister. This is not some little local election. This is not something that happened on Tuesday because someone was in a bad mood. This is vanquished. Wow, it's more serious, right? That's the feeling that this word gives us. When would we actually use it in everyday life? Probably. So I would use the word vanquished when I'm up against a force that is likely to defeat me, right? And it could be, I don't know, an organization. It could be an insurance institution, right? Something like that. So let's say after a major dispute with the insurance claims adjuster after my car accident, with months and months of back and forth, right? My claim finally succeeded, and my opponent was vanquished, okay? I might use it in that case. It's so serious. Now, to be clear, that didn't actually happen. It wasn't a big deal. It worked out. But I would say that if that did happen, Okay? Let's keep going.
Sue Gray is no longer at the heart of Keir Starmer's government. Here last month at the White House.
Okay, so this is the Prime Minister. Anytime you hear Starmer, that's the Prime Minister. And that's the person we're talking about, Sue Gray, there on the right of the screen. And she was part of his government. If you hear someone say someone is part of someone's government, then they're in, let's say, the cabinet or an important position within the administration. Same thing for the U.S. Biden's government would be the cabinet, the people that are appointed, and they can hire and fire them as they choose. They're not elected officials. The prime minister or the president or something, they're elected. But their cabinet are just people they choose, people they appoint.
Keir Starmer's government. Here last month at the White House.
Britain needs stability, not more chaos.
She attended Labour's manifesto launch. She attended
Labour's manifesto launch. So manifesto is sort of a formal document stating the ideology or belief systems of someone. You might use the word manifesto for a person who's, kind of crazy, and they're writing about their world's beliefs and how much they hate the world, or the Labour Party in the government and their beliefs, the things that they want to put into place in the UK. Labour is the name of the party, just so you know.
planned its first 100. She attended Labour's manifesto launch. She was meant to have planned its first 100 days in office.
She was meant to, meaning I was meant to do that, but I didn't do it. So it means you did not do something, but you were supposed to. I think Americans would probably use the word supposed to more often than meant to.
Chaos.
She attended Labour's manifesto launch. She was meant to have planned its first 100 days in office, but there have been persistent high-level leaks criticising her actions in government.
Persistent high-level leaks. Okay? Now you probably know what a leak is, like a leaky faucet or a water leaking out of a bucket or something like that. Is this the same? Yes, it's exactly the same. But a leak, when you're talking about politics or government or the news, a leak is when somebody was supposed to not say something and they have said it, or maybe information gets to the news or gets to the media from an anonymous source. That anonymous source, someone who doesn't want their name mentioned, may be an insider. An insider is someone who has knowledge that the public doesn't have, maybe someone who works in the staff of Sue Gray, who has basically said to the media, hey, she's doing this, hey, this is going on, hey, this is happening. They are leakers, and you could call them a leaker. We need to find the leaker. We need to find the leaker, right? We need to find the leaker of the leaks. What's leaking? The things that they don't want people to know, the things they don't want the news and the media and the press to find out about, basically.
In office, but there have been persistent high-level leaks criticising her actions in government, and she was gone on day 93.
Okay, she's fired. That's what it means. She got fired on day 93. She was appointed by the Prime Minister, and after a fairly short period of time, she was fired, and there were leaks leading up to her being fired.
Culture that allows that level of briefing is a toxic.
On day 93.
A culture that allows that level of briefing is a toxic culture in which trust is eroded.
Okay, so we have an erosion of trust. Now, a briefing is usually just a session where people get together and important information is shared. And so this guy is saying that something in the way that they do briefings is toxic. Toxic means it does damage to the whole system. It does damage to relationships, perhaps. it does damage to trust. And so here we have an erosion of trust. So it seems what's happened is that Sue Gray, this lady who has now been fired, she's no longer in the position and she's been replaced by somebody else. She was holding briefings, I think it seems, that have eroded the trust of the prime minister. That's my understanding. I believe that's what's going on. I don't have a ton of knowledge about what exactly is going on in British politics, and I'll be totally honest, I also don't have a ton of knowledge about what's going on in American politics. I used to, back between maybe the years 2014 to 2018. I was really into the news and following things and knowing what's going on in elections and all of that. Now, I don't really pay as much attention. It's kind of there in the background. If something is extremely important, usually people will just tell me about it anyway. I don't pay too much attention. Anyway. Oh, I skipped. I always do this. It's too close to the play button.
That level of briefing is a toxic culture in which trust is eroded.
The Keir Starmer,
Trust is eroded. Trust is eroded. So if something is eroded, it's broken down over time. It's not instant. It's not sudden. And trust is that way, right? If you do something that I thought you wouldn't do and I'm surprised by it, then my trust meter goes down a little bit. I say, well, okay, everyone makes mistakes, don't worry about it. But then it happens again, and something else happens again, and I'm starting to think, okay, I did trust you, and now things are, I don't know what's happening, right? I'm losing trust. The trust that we had built up, I'm losing it over time. So that is an erosion of trust. My trust is being eroded.
Suspect might have read the Riot Act to people in their new jobs. Don't let this briefing happen again. The Keir Starmer you suspect might have read the Riot Act.
Okay, so yeah, let me give some context. This guy, Sam White, he was previously in the same position. He was also let go. And there's a sort of a series of people in that position who are let go. Like, I don't know, like being the head of the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts. They're constantly replaced at a very specific pace or cadence. This guy was the one that was there before Sue, and they mentioned the Riot Act. So anytime someone says read the Riot Act, this is a reference to a rule that has since been repealed in the UK, but it was basically one in which a group of protesters could be legally dispersed. Basically, you've got together to protest something. Well, we read you the Riot Act, basically, break it up or face the consequences. And I believe at the time it was potentially death. So it's about, warning somebody, essentially. Well, it's the same. Usually you would use, and Americans don't really use this, but you would read the Riot Act when you would say this, read the Riot Act to them to basically say, hey, don't do it again, get angry at them perhaps, right? Threaten them, warn them that if they do this, if you continue to erode my trust or if you continue to violate my trust, you're gone, basically. And so that seems to be a common trend here.
In which trust is eroded.
The Keir Starmer you suspect might have read the Riot Act to people in their new jobs. Don't let this briefing happen again.
I certainly hope so. I've had the Riot Act.
Yeah, so you can just listen to that and hear the word warning. Give people a warning. Don't let it happen again.
Occasionally from Keir. He's quite good.
Hold
on. He's quite good at it.
I suspect people may have thought
briefing happen again.
I certainly hope so. I've had the right act occasionally from Keir. He's quite good at it.
I suspect people
So he's good at giving warnings, I guess is what he's saying there.
may have thought that I am perhaps too much of a challenger or a disruptor. I am both.
Sue Gray explaining a previous
So this
hiccup
is Sue in a previous interview, doing a very weird interview on a hill in the grass with mics that don't seem to be doing a good job at reducing the wind noise, but yeah, okay. And she's not talking about this issue, but she's calling herself a disruptor. She's using it in a positive sense. So she's saying basically, as a disruptor, someone who's willing to maybe upset the status quo, someone who doesn't follow the standard rules, someone who says, if you tell me something, I'll say maybe, but then I might have to find my own way of doing it. This is possibly a good thing in some situations, and I think she seems to think that it is. But it's possibly also the reason that she got let go from the position, right? So she's using disruptor. To disrupt something is to change the way things are normally done. You have a status quo, and then a disruptor as a person, a disruption, a thing that happens, ends the status quo or upsets it in some way.
her career. She attended last year's party conference. Her critics say she tried to downgrade or drop many Labour advisers in office. She told friends it was a quality issue. Her critics said she was building a power base.
Okay. So what seems to be going on here is that building a power base is maybe building support for yourself, for your own political aspirations in this case, building a group of people who are around you, who she's briefing people, she's giving people information who maybe shouldn't have it or something like that. There's something that's going on that's maybe making the Prime Minister think that she is looking after herself too much and thinking more about her future than her role in her current position, possibly. Maybe scheming or plotting or planning something political, building a power base, supporting herself with other people around her. So a base would be sort of a foundation, right? A foundation. It's usually used in politics or leadership or government, things like that, instead of foundation.
Morgan McSweeney watching Keir Starmer speak before the election campaign he masterminded. He's tried being chief.
To mastermind something is to plan it in a very careful way, usually suggesting that it's done in a good way, that it's a mastermind is someone who sees every single step that will happen in the future and knows what's going to happen. If this happens, then this will happen. But if this happens, then these two things will happen. So you masterminded the process. It's like an episode of Sherlock. You see 9 steps ahead. You know every possibility and contingency. So to mastermind something is to say, okay, this person will behave in this way if we do that, and if she does that, then these 3 things will happen, and then I will step in and I will do this. I've masterminded the whole thing, right? Sometimes that has a connotation of this person is kind of evil or has bad intentions, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that.
Morgan McSweeney watching Keir Starmer speak before the election campaign he masterminded. He's trying.
So Morgan McSweeney, I believe this is the man who's replaced Sue, and he masterminded the election. Apparently he's the mastermind behind maybe bringing Starmer in as Prime Minister, possibly? That might be it. I'm not totally sure.
Being Chief of Staff before, and Keir Starmer seems to be getting through them. Speak before the election campaign he masterminded. He's tried being Chief of Staff before, and Keir Starmer.
Okay, so he's trying to be Chief of Staff. Now he is, but he was trying to do that previously, I see.
Seems to be getting through them.
Were you getting flashbacks when you heard about Keir Starmer getting rid of it?
Okay, so he's going through them. What does that mean?
Seems to be getting through them.
He's getting through them, I think, meaning he's cycling through this position, right? The chief of staff position is something that he's continually, okay, next one, you're fired, next one, you're fired, right? And the person they're talking to on Zoom, he's one of those, as I mentioned. So now he's going to say, are you getting flashbacks? Basically, this is when you had a traumatic event happen in your life, and something then happens that reminds you of the traumatic event. PTSD, a soldier goes to war. When they get home after the war, they see fireworks and they have a flashback of being under fire in a battle, and that triggers their PTSD and they have an anxiety attack. So that's the kind of thing. Getting flashbacks is usually a negative thing, reminding you in the present of a past event that was negative or traumatic. So they're talking to this guy on Zoom who previously was let go from the same position, and now he's being asked if Sue's departure is traumatic in some way, giving him flashbacks of his own departure.
Were you getting flashbacks when you heard about Keir Starmer getting rid of a chief of staff?
No, not flashbacks. I've done all my processing and, dealt with my unresolved feelings on the subject. Morgan.
Okay, no flashbacks. He's saying I've if there were flashbacks, then he hasn't resolved it in his mind. He hasn't processed it. He's saying, no, this happened to me. Same thing. I was let go, but I've processed it. I've dealt with the situation in my mind emotionally. I've worked through it. Unresolved feelings, right? I've processed that. To process an experience is to kind of think through it and work through the difficulties until you don't feel so bad about it anymore.
McSweeney, in his first tour of duty as chief of staff, did about 15 months before my appointment. I did about 15 months. I think Sue's done something similar. So,
okay, now, maybe he hasn't worked through all of it. I wonder, this is something that came up when I was watching this the first time, if he's possibly coping here. He's saying he's processed it, but this is just my little theory here. He's saying, okay, there was a guy before me. He served for 15 months. I served for 15 months. And now Sue served for about 15 months. Now he's saying this possibly explains a pattern. The pattern is Starmer, basically what he does is he hires a chief of staff, then he fires them, then he hires another one, and he fires that one, and he hires another one, and he fires that one, and he does that about every 15 months. And I'm just one of those, so it's not a big deal. So I'm wondering if he's possibly coping a little bit to say it's not me. It's not because of something I did, that his processing might also be just kind of saying, oh, well, it's part of a pattern and it's not a big deal. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know. I wonder if he's using this as an emotional crutch to not have to evaluate any flaws in his performance as a chief of staff. Coping is when you come up with an explanation to say that, it's not that bad and you weren't wrong, and it's usually a way to avoid accountability.
There seems to be a natural flow of these things.
In Westminster today, a demonstration to restore the winter fuel allowance for all pensioners. In the long wait for the budget, it's become the single new unexpected.
Pensioners are people who receive a pension. Older people who receive a pension. And I'm not sure about the issue with the fuel allowance, but I'm assuming fuel allowance is related to a program maybe for the elderly, people who are retired, who need heat in the winter, fuel to provide heat in the winter, and maybe something has changed in that, and people are upset about it, so they're protesting.
In Westminster today, a demonstration to restore the winter fuel allowance for...
And a protest, another way of saying a protest is a demonstration. Sometimes you hear protest, demonstration. Now, riot is different. A riot is violent. A riot is people, burning cars and throwing bottles through windows. A demonstration, a protest is usually supposed to be peaceful and organized.
All pensioners. In the long wait for the budget, it's become the single new unexpected policy that Labour in office has become known for many a giant political mistake. Margaret Thatcher's first Chancellor took 41 days to come up with his first budget. After Labour's last landslide, it took the team 62 days to produce a budget. David Cameron's government's first budget came 47 days after the election, but Keir Starmer's government will have been in office for 118 days before Rachel Reeves gets round to unveiling her first budget.
So gets round to unveiling. Unveiling is to release something, to unveil the next iPhone, for example. But to get around, he says gets round. It's a slightly abbreviated, less formal way of saying get around. Before she gets round to the budget is the plan to spend the money, how they're going to spend the money, right? And so to get around to it is to finally do it, or to talk about that you will finally do it eventually, but often as a way to avoid a specific commitment to time. So if I say, hey, when are you going to replace the filters for the AC? Yeah, I'll get around to it. Or I might say something like, I'll get around to it this week. So I don't want to commit to a specific day or time, but I will eventually, it's like saying eventually, I will eventually do it within this week. I don't know when, maybe Friday, maybe Sunday. Eventually this week it will happen. I'll get around to it. If you don't have anything like I'll get around to it this week, but just I'll get around to it, it often kind of suggests, hey, don't give me too much pressure about this. I will do it, but I'll do it on my own time. Here it's emphasizing that it took longer than usual to provide the plan for the budget, right? They eventually got around to it kind of later than other administrations, 118 days. Oops, let's move forward.
21 days to come up with his first budget. After Labour's last landslide, it took the team 62 days to produce a budget. David Cameron's government's first budget came 47 days after the election, but Keir Starmer's government will have been in office for 118 days before Rachel Reeves gets round to unveiling her first budget.
The Labour government's been defined by its only spending action, which is to take away the winter fuel allowance from 10 million pensioners. And so,
right, so that explains the issue. Taking away the fuel allowance from 10 million pensioners. So there's an allowance of fuel, meaning they're given that, I think, because they're pensioners, they're just given that, and they have a specific amount that they get as pensioners in the winter, and that's been taken away for some reason to cut costs, perhaps. For the
budget, the only indication of Labour's priorities, it seems that we want to take money away from welfare and from older people.
Okay, so yeah, they're saying it's a political problem because it looks like that political party just wants to take money away from old people.
Side by side, early in Sue Gray's tenure, Morgan McSweeney has now had his first full day in the job. Keir Starmer hoping a campaign strategist can do what a career civil servant could not.
Talk to people who've known Keir Starmer for years, and they quite often talk about how he's not like other politicians, the ones you normally meet in Parliament, people who've been obsessed by politics since they were infants or embryos. He actually...
Embryos is a joke, right? And infants is a joke too. Basically, Starmer's apparently not a career politician or not the regular type of politician. He's not that interested in politics, but unlike people who have been interested in it their entire lives.
He doesn't like politicians that much. He doesn't like politics that much. And the Sue Gray appointment was kind of a part of all of that, to see if you can do politics a slightly different way. But now he's going to be injecting politics, he hopes, into the top of his government like some sort of adrenaline shot with the appointment of Morgan McSweeney. So if it's not a giant change...
Comparing an appointment, essentially hiring someone, to the cabinet, to the administration, as an injection, basically injecting something like a drug. He's using adrenaline, so adrenaline would make you more active and would make your heart beat faster. And adrenaline is what makes you stronger, possibly, if you have a shot of adrenaline. So he's using that analogy, basically saying this appointment, getting rid of Sue and replacing Sue with the new guy, this appointment is like a shot of adrenaline. And sometimes you'll hear people say it was like a shot of adrenaline directly to the muscle or something, or directly into the bloodstream, which made then somebody do something that they would do if they had a shot of adrenaline. but often you hear it as like a shot of adrenaline.
It is an adaptation, perhaps, to the way he was going about things. Why did the Sue Gray experiment fail? We'll talk to her critics in government, and they say she was secretive, she was on mission creep, she was dabbling in party politics when she shouldn't be.
Dabbling. Okay, so now they're saying, well, what was wrong with Sue? She was secretive. She wasn't open, her communication. She was dabbling. Listen to that.
Government, and they say she was secretive, she was on mission creep, she was dabbling in party politics when she...
Dabbling in party politics. To dabble in something is to do it not in a serious way, right? Oh, you're just kind of dabbling in this. Now, sometimes that's okay because that's, you do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I dabble in woodworking. I do a bit of dabbling maybe in rocketry. I dabble a bit in philosophy or whatever, thing you do a little bit here and a little bit there. I dabble. So a hobby, an interest, right? Well, she's dabbling possibly in something dangerous. Party politics, meaning scheming, planning, secretive stuff that could make people think that she's out for herself only. If she's dabbling in that, well, that could be dangerous. To dabble in something dangerous is to risk a bad consequence, a bad result. If dabbling with drugs, that could lead to a major addiction and health problems and going to jail. Dabbling with party politics could maybe lead to being fired from a position. Right? So it's not necessarily a negative word, although it often has a negative connotation of not being serious about something, but doing a little bit, and especially if there's some negative consequence that's possible, to being playing with fire, kind of playing with something dangerous.
She shouldn't be. She wasn't as organised as people say. Talk to her allies, and they say actually what they came across was a feral band of SPADs, special advisors, who'd been bonded together in the anti-Corbynista years.
A feral band. So feral, if you hear feral, you'll often hear it related to animals. Feral dogs, feral cats, feral animals, they're not domesticated. They're wild, and they're running around wherever they like. And so they're unpredictable. They're not following the rules. And if you describe a group, a political group, or another team in the company as being feral, they're just crazy. They you don't know what they're going to do next. They're wild. They could do anything. Unpredictability can be dangerous, right? If there's one team that's managed by someone who gives his team total freedom to do anything, they may be described as totally feral. And that could be a good thing if that's something that the company wants, right? They want this totally wild and creative team. But sometimes they might say, we're a bit feral, but we get stuff done. Well, sometimes that's a bad thing, basically saying, well, you guys, you're just wild and crazy. You're not productive. You're not moving the country forward. You're not paying attention to the interests of the people who you're supposed to be serving. You're just a feral, what did he say? What did he call them?
SPADs, special advisors.
SPADs, special advisors, right? So just a bunch of feral special advisors maybe looking out for their own interests.
Been bonded together in the anti-Corbynista years. There is an interesting point here as well about the politics of the government now. Sue Gray made a point of reaching out to ministers who felt unloved perhaps by Keir Starmer's leadership. On the soft left mainly, the wounded bird strategy, one of her critics in government called it. And over time, some of those critics inside government felt that she was becoming an advocate for those very ministers who felt slightly outside the magic circle. But what's happened now is that those people have lost Sue Gray, and we've talked in the past about how with Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet when he first came in, very soft left dominated, it's been a bit like a game.
This part is starting to lose me. This part is referencing things that I just don't understand. I understand the words, right? I know what shadow cabinet means. I get that, basically like kind of secretive or one that is underneath the real one, but I don't know what they're referencing in politics because I'm not paying attention to it. So I have trouble following this part just because I don't understand all of the references they're making. I don't know enough about what's going on in the UK.
Grey, and we've talked in the past about how with Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet when he first came in, very soft left dominated, it's been a bit like a game of sort of grandmother's footsteps. Every time he turns round, the right of the party have moved up around the table. They're now in all the senior positions around him. And
oh, I see. Okay, so there's more influence on the right, the conservative, in the Labour Party, and that is what he's describing as a game of grandmother's footsteps, where I think you look away and then you look back and they're closer, you look away and you look back and they're closer, and they're kind of creeping in to influence the party from the right.
they, with their focus on trying to get hardline messages out on immigration, on welfare, they're on trying to get hardline messages out on turns round, the right of the party have moved up around the table. They're now in all the senior positions around him.
So the right within the Labour Party are creeping into the top positions of the Labour Party, and they are now having an influence and may have something to do with this change.
And they, with their focus on trying to get hardline messages out on immigration.
So now they have a focus. Their focus is getting hardline messages out on immigration. Hardline is sort of strict, basically nothing past this, an absolute rule, right? If someone is not hardline about something, then they're flexible. They maybe say sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? If someone who has maybe a soft position on immigration doesn't really care too much about maybe the border. For example, in the U.S. politics, immigration is a big issue, and some people are very hardline against illegal immigration, meaning they want to be very strict with the southern border, and they want to police it, or they want to build walls, and they want to have they have a hardline position, you could say. Hardline, nobody, no illegal immigrants, right? And maybe some just don't care as much. They don't think it's a big deal, and they have a more tolerant position to people coming across the border and to asylum seekers and things like that, right? So a hardline position is sort of saying no, and that's the rule. Absolutely, no exceptions. That is a hardline position.
Immigration, on welfare, they, in the form of Morgan McSweeney, are now at the very centre of day-to-day government.
Okay, so Morgan McSweeney apparently is one of those guys in the right of the Labour Party who has that hardline immigration policy, who hardline immigration in the UK means something different from hardline immigration in the US. I'm actually not quite sure what it means exactly in the UK. I mean, I have a guess, but I would have to look into it. So we talked about vanquished, leaks, an erosion of trust, disruptor, power base, flashbacks, coping, getting around to it, dabbling, feral, and hardline. And this short video, there's a lot of information, a lot of references that are tough. You know, it's interesting how for things that are in the news, you will understand more or less, not necessarily because of the language itself, but because of the references. You know, I struggle with this one. I understand the language, but I have to then, it makes me want to research, okay, who's this? Why are they here? What is going on? What is their position? I have to try to understand what's happening in the political universe of the UK before I can actually understand what is being said in this video, which is interesting, right? Everything is embedded in a context that you have to understand something about before you can understand exactly what is said. You don't need to understand everything, but it's helpful to know a bit about the context. So that's it. If you have any questions about any of these, try them out yourself, the words and phrases we talked about. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and get a free course in the links in the description. Jack, hello, Mohit, and Sylvia, and Obalot Hello, welcome. Hello and welcome. As I said, we're going to be doing a shorter one today. I had planned to go through some phrasal verbs. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to happen. I was planning to incorporate a suggestion from Mary McCain from last week about doing images with each one, and I wanted to try it out, but we'll have to do it next week. So we're going to end it for today. We're going to call it a day. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it. Again, if you would like to listen and you're watching, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get podcasts. Just search Cloud English. You can do the same thing on YouTube. We are live every Friday, so feel free to join every Friday at around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which I think is 6 p.m. GMT, but someone correct me on that if I'm incorrect. Get 30% off the yearly membership, paid monthly. Yearly membership, paid monthly. That is in the links in the description, the website. You can also get a yearly membership as well. The benefit of the yearly membership, if you sign up for that, is you get a one-to-one session with me to talk about your goals and get a level assessment. So that comes with a one-to-one call with me. Yes, that is right. Let's see. What else? No, I think that's it. There's also the Discord. You're welcome to join that. If you like, it's a good place to reach out to me. And again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.